everybody, and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today's subject is a relatively small genre, but one that everybody is familiar with, primarily from TV and movies, and that is spying. We're going to talk about some of my favorite board games that involve the spy genre. So we're talking about like James Bond-ish type of things, where you're going in, getting information, the super spy knows everything, knows everyone, very suave, all that kind of stuff. The thing is that, like I said, the genre as far as board gaming is concerned is actually relatively small. There's not a whole lot of games that really embrace this. So with that, the first thing I'm going to do is really describe my personal thought process with this. So first and foremost is obviously the very traditional James Bond style spy games, you know, hidden information, trying to get the hidden information from your enemies, well, the other players, your enemies, whatever you want to call them, all that kind of stuff. So that very sort of straight and narrow type of thing. Of course, the other type of spy game or spy-ish thing is where, you know, you've got your two teams, you know, you've got the good guys and the bad guys, and, you know, again, trying to gather information, gather intel, actively trying to sabotage the other team, you know, all of this kind of stuff. So those are sort of the two prongs that I took when I was looking at games. That said, most of the games on my list are, I guess, what you could call traditional spying type of things. However, with that, as always, please let me know what your personal favorites are in the comments below, and I hope that you enjoy my video, and we'll go ahead and get started with my number 5. Number 5 is one of two games on this list that I unfortunately do not own, and it's one that is more of a social game. Now, several of these games are social games, but this particular one is at the bottom of the list because it's less about the spying aspect and more simply about the interaction that you're having amongst your teammates. The game itself is Codenames. Now, obviously, we recently had the release of, I think it's Codename Visuals or whatever it's called. We're using pictures, or it might just be Codenames Pictures. But the idea behind this game is that you have a single teammate who is giving out clues. The rest of the team has to determine which names, there's just a bunch of random words, which of those correspond to the different spies, right? So if you've seen Mission Impossible and they have the knock list where it matches the person's code name to their real name and stuff like that, that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about the person who is codenamed Jet and things like that. So the person who is giving the clues has to give a clue and a number where you say it is this clue and then, you know, 3. And that indicates that the key word is indicative of 3 of the spies for that team. Whoever finds all of their spies first wins. Whoever gets the assassin or doesn't get all of their spies loses. It's a really fun social game. It's a very cool sort of pseudo-deduction because it's more about knowing your other teammates and understanding what they mean when they say a specific word. But even so, you know, you are talking about spies, you're talking about, you know, the keywords, the code words, code phrases, all that kind of stuff. And on top of that, you are to an extent sharing information with the other team, because as you're sitting there chit-chatting around, then, you know, the other team is hearing your keywords, you're hearing their keywords, so you can both sit there and try to figure out what the other person means. It's a really fun, very cool little social deduction game, but again, as far as spying is concerned, relatively low on the list, but still my number 5. At number 4, I've got a game that is not so much about spying in particular, but more about working against the good guys. There are actually two games in this genre that I talk about fairly frequently, and I compare them fairly often as well. The game that I picked for this is Battlestar Galactica. The other game that I like to talk about that does this similar mechanic is Shadows over Camelot. And what I'm talking about is the traitor mechanic. You know, you have, in this case, Battlestar Galactica, you have the Cylons, and the idea is that you have members of the team who are actively working against the rest of them, or they should be actively working against them. Now, ideally, the whole point is the Cylons don't get caught, and they can just sort of meander about and essentially be just productive enough that they don't raise too many suspicions, but they're not as efficient as they could be. I really enjoy this type of game. This is a great example of what the spy genre is all about. It's all about infiltrating the enemy. It's about being in there, being a trusted comrade and all that kind of stuff, and then just sort of taking everything down from the inside. And that's exactly what you're trying to do in Battlestar Galactica or Shadows over Camelot with the more traditional traitor card. But again, a lot of games have this type of mechanic where it's a cooperative game and you have one person or, you know, a handful of people who are working against everybody else. It's a really fun time. I personally enjoy Battlestar Galactica. It's a little bit more complex though, so if you want to get into it, I would recommend Shadows over Camelot simply because it's a little bit easier to wrap your head around. But even so, if you like the show, if you like sci-fi in general, Battlestar Galactica is where it's at, and it is my number 4. At number 3, I've got the other game on this list that I unfortunately don't own, and unlike Codenames and Battlestar Galactica, it is spy through and through. The game itself is called Spy in the Alley, or Spies in the Alley. I don't remember exactly which one, but the game premise itself is very simple. The idea is that you are playing as some nationality, and you need to go and collect various items that are related to your nationality. And it's very simple. Once you collect all of those, then you just go to the meetup point, and if you have all of the items, then you win. The thing is, as you are going around purchasing these items and obtaining these items, everybody sees what you're getting. So there's less secrecy, and the idea is that everybody knows which items the individual nationalities need. So if you start picking up all the items for Russia, people are going to think that you are Russia. So of course the idea there is that you have a big bluffing mechanic in terms of you'll pick up, you know, this one from Russia and this one from the US, and just like sort of try to keep everybody guessing is the idea. It's a really fun game, but it's an older one, so the mechanics aren't great. It's relatively boring in terms of how you're moving around and what you're doing and this kind of stuff. There's not a lot of variety to be had with it, but again, as far as like true blue spy game, that is really what you're talking about. And so again, with like Codenames and Battlestar Galactica, yes, spy, traitor, infiltration, that kind of stuff, but when people think spy, probably don't think necessarily of those, but Spies in the Alley, you know, like the Spy versus Spy on Mad TV, all that kind of stuff. This is the kind of game that we think of, but it's a little bit lower on the list simply because I don't enjoy it as much. It's not quite as versatile as the other two that I've got, but it is still amazingly fun, and my number 3. Both number 1 and 2 on this list are relatively popular social deduction games, one of which, my number 2, is one that I have talked about many times at length, and it is The Resistance. Now, of course, when you have a game where you've got The Resistance and The Spies, it's difficult to keep it off of a list about games about spies. It is a tremendously fun social deduction game. It has a great amount of variety. It's a lot of fun with a lot of numbers of players. The biggest issue I have with this is that you do need a lot of people. It plays, I believe the minimum is 5. It might be 6, let me see. The minimum is 5, but I highly recommend that you play with at least 6 or 7. Minimum. 5 people is pretty boring, and it generally doesn't work very well with Resistance. However, the game itself is really fun because, again, you're looking at people. You're not looking at cards. You're not, you know, spying on specific items that somebody has. You are watching their actions. You're watching their activities. You're watching how they vote. You're watching how they interact with other players. all of that kind of stuff. It is very much what this spy game is all about. Now, you can make an argument for many other of the indie games or the indie card and board games company games. So, for example, you've got Resistance Avalon, you've got Coup, you've got a new game that recently came out, Grifters, but that's not so much spy as it is, you know, like the bad guy version, whatever you want to call it. But either way, a lot of this company's games, not only do they take place in the same universe, but they have a very similar theme. I personally am the biggest fan of Resistance itself. I love the expansions. They added a whole lot of really fun mechanics to it. I only have one of the expansions though, but I've played with both of them. Either way, the Resistance, it's a great way of conveying, well, so I assume it's a good way of conveying what life as a spy is like, because you really don't know what's going on around you, and if you are a spy, then you have to behave as much as possible like the people around you. Again, trying to infiltrate the bad guys, as with Shadows over Camelot and Battlestar Galactica and those types of games. But either way, the Resistance, really fun game, great social deduction, and my number 2. At number 1, I've got a game that would be virtually impossible to keep off of a list like this. As I said, it's another social deduction game, and this is one that was funded on Kickstarter, although I believe Resistance was as well. But this one was eventually picked up by Cryptozoic and published, and it is Spyfall. This is a tremendously fun but can be extremely aggravating game. In this game, you only have a single person who is the spy, and the idea is that they are trying to figure out the physical location that everyone else is at. And the idea is that you're trying to ask leading but not leading questions of everybody else to figure out if they know where they are. And you can ask anything either as vague or as specific as you want. But the idea, again, is that the spy is trying to figure out where you are, so if you ask questions that are too specific, then they're going to figure it out really quickly. For example, if you ask, are you in space? One of the locations is the space station. And if you are at the space station, you would have to say yes. But that is the only one that is in space. So then the spy would immediately know that you are at the space station. Stuff like that. And, you know, most of the questions that you hear are things like, is it day or night? You know, how long have you been here? Are you wearing a hat? Do you work here? You know, stuff along those lines. That's typically the types of questions that you get. Not super probing, but hopefully enough to get information about what you're trying to get. And again, just like with the Resistance, and just like with, you know, not necessarily Codenames, but with Battlestar Galactica and Spy in the Alley, is that you're getting like little tidbits of information and you're trying to assimilate them all together. One of the things that I really love about Spyfall is the fact that you've only got the single spy. You've only got the one person infiltrating, or whatever you want to call it. And so it's sort of, the whole point is that it's you against the world, as they say. And it's so much fun. But the biggest issue I have with this game, and one thing that I mentioned in a previous video, is that it's really difficult for new players. If you get stuck with the spy, then it's virtually impossible to win in your first couple of games. It really is. It's an awkward enough game that new players, even seasoned gamers who have not played this game before, can have a difficult time. And in a way, I think that really makes the spy aspect a little bit more, I guess it makes it like sort of hit home a little bit more, because you would expect that. As the spy, you're supposed to be uncomfortable. It's a weird situation. You don't know what's going on. You don't know these other people and all this kind of stuff. Like, again, you're infiltrating this unknown entity, this unknown group of people, and so I think it captures that idea a little bit better. But regardless, Spyfall, great game, tremendously fun social deduction game, and my number 1 game about spies. So that's it for me, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed my top 5 board games about spies and spying and all that kind of stuff. As I mentioned, the genre itself is relatively small, but you can interpret a lot of games to think about spying. So for example, we've got Dominion Intrigue. You know, anytime you're getting information in a game that is generally hidden, you can consider it to be a game where you're spying on people, or if you're guessing about the information that other people have. That's why I bring up Dominion Intrigue, because you know you're flipping attack cards and you have like the thief and the spy as actual cards that you can play. But would you inherently call it a spy game? I personally wouldn't, but would you? As always, I'm very curious what you guys have to think about this particular genre, this sort of case, all this kind of stuff. Do you enjoy spy games? Do you enjoy the hidden information and the social deduction, which we normally see in a game like this? All of that kind of stuff. But regardless, thank you so very much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much again, everybody, for watching my video of my top 5 favorite spy board games. Again, this is a relatively small category. I'm really curious what you all have to think about it. Do you think that it's sort of underrepresented and we need more of this type of game? Do you think we have just enough? Are you kind of bored of it and just think that we need to focus on other things? Please let me know anything and everything in the comments below. In addition, as always, I've got several of my playlists linked up at the top of the page, so you can see some more of my work, and if you want to see more of me in the future, please click on that big giant subscribe button. With that, thank you very, very much, and I will see you next time.